Hello again, and welcome to the channel where I discuss all things spiritual and religious. If you're new, a very warm welcome to you. Today I'm going to talk about the Second Council of Nicaea. It seems like this series about the seven councils has gone on forever. It's only been 7 weeks. But in fact, the 7 ecumenical councils of the early Christian church was a long one. The journey took until the year 787, 8 centuries, to decide on the basic doctrines of the church. So this council was quite different than all the others, where the theological questions had centered around the nature of God and of Christ. This one is about an issue that developed in the church around the use of icons and sacred art. That is, pictorial representations of Jesus and Mary, the apostles, and the saints. Now, the way I tell this story, it begins with Leo III, the Emperor of Rome, from 717 to 740. Before becoming emperor, he had served as a military governor of the western section of Asia Minor. This was the largest and most important of the military imperial provinces. When he began to rule, he had to face the ferocious siege of Constantinople by the Muslims from both land and sea. But after a year of struggle, Leo's forces repelled the Muslim attack, and this provided a foundation for a securer empire, and it made him popular both with the army and with the citizens of the nation. Leo had some strong views about his role as emperor. Based on the letter of Peter, that's one of the letters in the Christian Bible, chapter 5, verse 2, Leo saw God as handing sovereignty to him in order to tend the faithful flock. There were no 2 swords or 2 powers governing the earth. There was only one, and that was the emperor. There was no question of emperor and patriarch sharing the direction of God's people, for there was no intermediary between God and the emperor, who was the sole earthly interpreter of the divine will, and it was his job to execute it. He thought of himself as the new Moses or the second Solomon. In the opinion of some scholars, he saw himself also as Hezekiah or Josiah, divinely appointed to cast the idols out of the house of the Lord. Well, in 726, Leo opened the struggle to overthrow the sacred images of the Byzantine world, and the result was the iconoclast controversy, which would last for over 100 years. Christian opposition to sacred pictures was nothing new. This was a continual conflict which finally erupted by the explosion of the actions of Leo III. They erupted upon the church and caused quite a bit of disturbance. The early church Christians had ringing in their ears the denunciation of the graven images of the Hebrew scriptures, and they were surrounded by the idols of the pagan Greco-Roman world. Christian art first appeared around 200 AD, and by the 4th centuries, the churches were filled with pictorial art. Some felt positively about the art, believing that it was a good way to teach those who were unable to read or who didn't have a text the Bible lessons through the use of this art. The opposition replied that Christians didn't need any artificial image of Christ's historical image. His splendor couldn't be depicted in lifeless colors. Christians needed to look forward to the time when they would meet him face to face in the glory of the age to come. In the East, the attitude toward images as a means of education or as memorials changed over time. As people began to look at the images as links to the realities of the spiritual world, and that these images offered them help and protection. Images were used not only in the churches where the authorities could direct their use, but now they were in the homes where icons depicting Christ and the saints became objects of private devotion. With incense burning before them, they became objects of ritual genuflections and prostrations. And stories were passed around of miracles associated with the use of images of the Lord. This attitude was also enhanced by the common use of images of the emperor of the empire. His image was found on all the coins and all official documents. His portrait had long been displayed at all government functions, whether they were military or civil. The portrait represented the sacred person of the emperor, and even more, it made him present vicariously at the function. So by the 6th century, the attitude toward the imperial portraits was carried over to the icons. Eventually, in that century, there was some attempt to establish a systematic theory of images. In part, it said that although the artist portrays only the house, the bodily shell in which the spirit dwelt, still this shell, hallowed by the Spirit, reflects its divine inhabitant. Now this went a step further when the idea of the Spirit which dwelt in the person now overshadows the image, incarnating in it miraculous powers. Regarding the image of Christ, it was no longer thought of as a simple reminder of the incarnation, but as an organic part, an extension, even a reenactment of it. Slowly, the theory that the image represented the incarnation became a means of demonstrating the incarnation as a perpetual presence. The role of the image was in the process of becoming sacramental, just like the sacrifice of the Mass. Well, Emperor Leo, possessed of a biblically inspired antipathy to idolatry, began a propaganda campaign against icons. And when that didn't have the result he desired, he ordered the destruction of the icon of Christ that was located over the doors of the imperial palace. When Pope Gregory II in Rome heard about all of this, he responded by telling Leo in no uncertain terms that church business was the job of the Pope, not the emperor's. The Pope doesn't meddle in his state affairs, and the emperor should keep out of church affairs. The work of Leo and later iconoclastic supporters resulted in the destruction of icons, the removal of sacred art from the churches, the persecution of monks and others who venerated and promoted iconography. In 740, though, Leo died, to be succeeded by his son Constantine V, who was a greater enemy of the sacred images than his father had been. So he called a council to define the iconoclast doctrine. Now, it included no patriarchs and no representatives from the Pope. And although it was overturned by this Second Council of Nicaea only 33 years later, the members met for 7 months, and they gave a final decree called the Horus, which is included in the records of the Second Nicene Council. So these bishops believed that it was Satan who first tempted humans to worship creatures instead of God, but that the Mosaic Law and the prophets undid this ruinous course. In order to save humans, God sent his Son to turn us from the worship of idols to the worship of God in spirit and in truth. They were considering in their council a scriptural examination into the deceitful coloring of the pictures, which draws down the spirit, draws down the human, the spirit of man, from the lofty adoration of God to the low and material adoration of the creature. For them, there is a direct connection between heathen art and what was being used in the church. And they were not impressed by the idea that only God was worthy of worship, but that Mary, the saints, and icons were only venerated, not worshipped. That view, however, was the one accepted by the Second Council of Nicaea. That council began on September 24th, 787, and ended on October 31st. And it ended with the declaration of faith concerning the veneration of holy images. And it stated this: as the sacred and life-giving cross is everywhere set up as a symbol, so also should the images of Jesus Christ, the Virgin Mary, the holy angels, as well as the saints and other pious and holy men, be embodied in the manufacture of sacred vessels, tapestries, vestments, etc., and exhibited on the walls of churches, in the homes, and in all conspicuous places, by the roadside, and everywhere, to be revered by all who might see them. For the more they contemplated, the more they moved to fervent memory of their prototypes. Therefore, it is proper to accord to them a fervent and reverent veneration, not, however, the veritable adoration which, according to our faith, belongs to the divine being alone. For the honor accorded to the image passes over to its prototype, and whoever venerate the image, venerate in it the reality of what is their representative. So ended the argument against the use of sacred art. The council was accepted by most Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox branches of Christianity, and by some Protestant groups as well. This question will be revisited during the Protestant Reformation, which I'll teach about in up-and-coming videos, where some rejected even displaying the cross, but those are topics for the future. Now, despite the teaching about icons defined at this Seventh Ecumenical Council in 787, the iconoclasts began to trouble the church again. After the death of the last iconoclast emperor, Theophilus, and his young son, Michael III, with his mother, the regent Theodora, and Patriarch Methodius, summoned the Synod of Constantinople in 843 to bring peace to the church. At the end of the first session, all made a triumphal procession to Hagia Sophia, restoring the icons of the church. This occurred on the 11th of March, 1843, which that year was the first Sunday of Lent. The Synod decreed that a perpetual feast on the anniversary of that day should be observed each year on the first Sunday of Great Lent, and named the day the Sunday of Orthodoxy. And so it is celebrated in Eastern Orthodox Christianity to this day. In many of these council lessons, I've relied heavily on one particular text, which is available to you online. I've put the information in every description box where it applies. However, I want to give special thanks and credit to the work of Leo Donald Davis, S.J., for his work entitled The First Seven Ecumenical Councils, 325 to 787, Their History and Theology. And if you'd like lots more details about the councils, please check that out. Well, if you enjoyed this video, I invite you to subscribe to this channel, hit the like button and the notification button to see all the videos I upload. Let me encourage you in your studies and on your spiritual journey. I hope that for you this week is filled with good health and happiness, and I'll see you real soon. Bye for now.